It was supposed to be a harmless joke until the first message arrived. Sarah never imagined that boredom could lead her into something like this. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Her roommate, Megan, had left town to visit her family, leaving behind an eerily quiet apartment. Sarah, ever the curious and playful type, found herself scrolling through Megan's laptop, which was, oddly, unlocked. Megan was the kind of person who kept to herself. She was polite but distant, never shared much about her life, and avoided personal questions like they were landmines. To Sarah, who thrived on connection and stories, this was a challenge she couldn't resist. That's when the idea hit her. What if I pretended to be Megan? Not in person, just online, on her social media. It wasn't like Megan had a ton of friends. Who would even notice? It'd be fun, Sarah thought. A week of pretending to be someone else. Just for laughs. So, she logged in. Megan's accounts were surprisingly easy to access, no two-factor authentication, no complex passwords. Just a simple login, and suddenly Sarah was Megan. She posted a casual photo from Megan's gallery, nothing incriminating, just a coffee cup and a blurry sunset captioned, "Back in town, finally." Within minutes, the likes started rolling in. But then came something unexpected. A message. "You shouldn't have come back." At first, Sarah laughed it off. Probably some inside joke. But then another message popped up. "Thought you were smarter than this." Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. Was someone messing with Megan? Or, was this part of something bigger? Sarah shrugged it off, telling herself she was overthinking. She replied with a light-hearted, "Missed this place too much," winky face, hoping to keep up the ruse. But the next message wiped the smile off her face. "We didn't forget what you did." Now, this wasn't funny anymore. By the next morning, Sarah felt a growing unease settle in her chest. She hadn't heard from Megan since she left. Normally, that wouldn't be weird. Megan wasn't exactly the chatty type, but now it felt ominous. Deciding to shake off the weirdness, Sarah continued the game. She scrolled through Megan's old photos and posted another innocuous image, Megan's favorite coffee shop. No caption this time, just a location tag, "Back at my old spot." Not 10 minutes later, another message arrived. "Meet me at 8 p.m. You know where." Sarah felt a chill crawl down her spine. What was this? She debated replying, but something told her to leave it alone. Instead, she closed the laptop and tried to distract herself with Netflix, but her mind kept returning to those words. "We didn't forget what you did." Later that night, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She wandered into Megan's room, a space Megan always kept meticulously private. Sarah hesitated at the door, but the tension was too much. She pushed it open. The room was cleaner than she expected. Bare walls, neatly folded clothes, and a small desk with nothing but a closed notebook on it. But when Sarah opened Megan's closet, she found something odd, a locked box shoved into the corner. Of course, Sarah thought. Every mystery has a box. After a few minutes of searching, she found the key taped under Megan's desk drawer. Heart pounding, she unlocked the box. Inside were old photos, documents, and, most disturbingly, a burner phone with dozens of missed calls and text messages from unknown numbers. Sarah flipped through the photos. Megan was in them, but not in the way Sarah knew her. She looked different. Younger, happier, but surrounded by people Sarah didn't recognize. One photo stood out. Megan, standing with a group of people in front of a rundown building. The back of the photo was scribbled with a single word, "Remember." Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was another message, from Megan's account. But Sarah hadn't sent anything. "Stop pretending. We're watching." Now, Sarah was officially freaked out. She tried calling Megan, but the call went straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into something dangerous. But the worst part? She had no idea what that something was. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind raced through possibilities. Was Megan running from someone? Was she hiding a secret Sarah had accidentally uncovered? And then, a final message came through. "We'll see you soon." Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a game anymore. What would you do if you found out your roommate was hiding a secret like this? Would you keep digging, or run while you still could? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this story. You're not going to believe what happens next. At first, she thought it was just a prank. But now, someone was outside her window. Sarah barely slept that night. Every creak of the apartment, every shadow flickering against the wall made her jump. She kept replaying the messages in her mind. "We didn't forget what you did. We'll see you soon." Who were these people? And more importantly, what had Megan done? The next morning, Sarah tried to shake off the paranoia. Maybe it was just some stupid joke between Megan and her old friends. Maybe Sarah was overreacting. She went about her morning routine, convincing herself it was all in her head, until she opened the door to leave for class. There, on the doormat, was an envelope. No name. No return address. Just her apartment number scrawled in messy handwriting. Her heart pounded in her chest as she picked it up. Inside was a single photograph, one Sarah hadn't seen before. It was Megan, but standing next to her was Sarah. The photo was taken from across the street, through their apartment window. Someone had been watching her. Sarah slammed the door shut, locking it, then triple-checking the windows. This wasn't just online anymore. Someone was physically close enough to take photos without her noticing. She grabbed her phone and tried calling Megan again. Voicemail. Again. This time, she left a message, her voice trembling. "Megan, it's Sarah. I don't know what's going on, but someone's been messaging me. They think I'm you. And now they're watching the apartment. Please call me back. I'm scared." She hung up and sat on the couch, staring at the burner phone she'd found in Megan's box. Maybe there's something in here, she thought. Her fingers hesitated over the screen before she powered it on. The phone buzzed to life, and immediately, notifications flooded in, dozens of missed calls and messages, all from unknown numbers. Sarah opened the most recent one. "You can't run forever." Another, "We know where you are." Her breath quickened. She scrolled further back, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain this. That's when she found a message from weeks ago, long before Megan had left for her trip. "Meet us at the docks. No cops. Or we finish what we started." The docks? What had Megan gotten herself into? By afternoon, Sarah felt like she was suffocating in the apartment. She needed to get out, clear her head, figure out what to do next. But when she stepped outside, her stomach dropped. Across the street, a black car was parked, engine idling. She hadn't seen it before, and she would have noticed. The windows were tinted, but Sarah could feel eyes on her. Was it them? She tried to act natural, walking briskly down the street, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She glanced over her shoulder, the car hadn't moved. But something told her it wasn't going to stay that way. At the campus library, Sarah tried to focus on anything but the growing fear inside her. She needed answers. If Megan wasn't going to call back, maybe Sarah could dig into her past another way. She opened her laptop and searched Megan's full name, expecting nothing more than a few old social media profiles. But what she found made her blood run cold. A news article, dated 3 years ago. Local woman disappears after witnessing crime at abandoned warehouse. The photo was blurry, but it was definitely Megan, her hair shorter, her face thinner, but unmistakably her. Sarah's eyes scanned the article. Megan had been listed as a missing person after allegedly witnessing something at a warehouse on the edge of town. The police never found her, and the case went cold. But Megan wasn't missing. She was here, living under a different name. Sarah's mind raced. Was Megan hiding from the people who sent those messages? If so, they must have thought Sarah was Megan when she posted on the social accounts. Her phone buzzed. Another message. Did you really think you could hide from us? Her hands trembled as she typed back, for the first time dropping the act. I'm not Megan. Leave me alone. The reply came almost instantly. Nice try, Megan. Sarah's heart pounded in her ears. She had to find Megan. Now. That night, Sarah couldn't bring herself to go back to the apartment. Instead, she stayed in a 24-hour diner near campus, nursing a cup of cold coffee and staring at the door every time it creaked open. She kept checking her phone, hoping, praying, for a response from Megan. Finally, around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Megan. Sarah's hands shook as she answered. Megan? Where are you? I've been getting these messages, and someone's been watching the apartment. What the hell is going on? There was silence on the other end for a long moment before Megan finally spoke, her voice low and shaky. Sarah, you need to get out of town. Now. What? Megan, no, you need to explain what's going on. Who are these people? Why do they think I'm you? Megan took a shaky breath. Because they're the reason I disappeared. And if they think you're me, they're not going to stop. What did you do, Megan? Sarah whispered. Another pause. It's not what I did. It's what I saw. Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead. She thought the worst was over. But the real danger hadn't even begun. Sarah stared at her phone, the call with Megan still fresh in her mind. It's not what I did. It's what I saw. Those words echoed in her head like a warning siren. What had Megan witnessed that forced her to disappear? And now, with these people thinking she was Megan, Sarah realized one terrifying truth: they wouldn't stop until they got to her. But running wasn't an option. Not yet. She needed answers. By morning, Sarah's fear had twisted into determination. She couldn't sit around waiting for something to happen. She had to act. First step, find out what Megan saw. Her mind went back to the news article, the abandoned warehouse, the crime Megan supposedly witnessed. Maybe the police report had more details, she thought. It was a long shot, but it was all she had. She headed to the local library, where old public records were stored. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that made her hyper-aware of every footstep, every whisper of movement. She found the records section and started digging. It didn't take long. February 15, 2019, incident at Riverside Warehouse, one unidentified male found dead, suspected foul play. No witnesses came forward. Case remains unsolved. Sarah's stomach dropped. But Megan was there. She was supposed to be the witness. So why didn't she come forward? Her eyes drifted to the last line of the report. Warehouse owned by Daniel Crane, local businessman with suspected ties to organized crime. Organized crime. The pieces started falling into place. Megan had seen something big, and these people were determined to keep it buried. But if they thought Megan was back in town, they'd do anything to silence her. Which meant Sarah was running out of time. On her way out of the library, Sarah felt that familiar prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart skipping a beat. The black car from before was parked across the street again. This time, the engine wasn't running. It was just sitting there. Watching. Sarah ducked into a nearby alley, her pulse pounding. She couldn't go home. She couldn't risk leading them back to the apartment. She needed to find Megan. And she knew exactly where to start. The docks. It was the last place Megan had been seen before she disappeared. If there were any clues left, they'd be there. It was risky, but Sarah had no choice. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah made her way to the waterfront. The air was heavy with the smell of salt and rust, the sound of distant foghorns echoing through the night. The docks were mostly deserted, except for a few workers unloading cargo in the distance. Sarah found the old warehouse easily. It was exactly like the photo from the news article. The building was run down, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. But what caught her attention was a faint light flickering from inside. Someone's here. She crept closer, her heart racing. Peering through a crack in the door, she could make out two figures inside. One of them was unmistakably Megan. The other was a man Sarah didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his face. His voice was low but sharp, the kind of voice that made your skin crawl. "You shouldn't have come back, Megan." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the confrontation Megan had been running from. But before she could react, the man grabbed Megan by the arm, dragging her deeper into the warehouse. Sarah's fear morphed into action. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher before slipping inside the building. The warehouse was dark and cold, every step echoing off the walls. Sarah followed the faint sounds of the conversation, her hands shaking. She knew this was dangerous. But she couldn't leave Megan behind. As she rounded a corner, she saw them. Megan was pinned against the wall, the man towering over her. "You saw too much. And now, you're gonna pay for it." Sarah didn't think. She grabbed a nearby metal pipe and slammed it against the wall, creating a loud crash. The man spun around, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. "Megan," he barked, confusion flickering across his face. Sarah's heart pounded. "He thinks I'm Megan." But before he could react, sirens wailed in the distance. The man cursed and bolted out the back door, disappearing into the shadows just as the police burst in through the front. Sarah ran to Megan, who was trembling but alive. "Are you okay?" Sarah gasped, helping her to her feet. Megan nodded weakly. "We need to get out of here. This isn't over." At the police station, Megan finally told Sarah everything. 3 years ago, Megan had witnessed Daniel Crane and his men disposing of a body at the warehouse. She'd planned to go to the police, but before she could, they found out she'd seen them. Threats followed. Megan knew they wouldn't stop until she was silenced, so she disappeared, leaving behind her old life, her family, everything. "I thought I could outrun them," Megan whispered. "But I was wrong. And now, you're caught in the middle because of me." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. Megan had been living in fear for years, and now Sarah understood the weight she'd been carrying. But one thing was clear, they couldn't keep running. It was time to fight back. If you were Sarah, would you stay and fight or run as far as you could? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Things are about to get even more intense. They thought they could escape. But the past always catches up. Sarah had never felt fear like this before. It clung to her skin, heavy and suffocating, even in the bright lights of the police station. The officers had taken Megan's statement, promised to investigate, but there was something unsettling in the way they spoke, like they'd heard stories like this before and knew how they usually ended. They offered Sarah and Megan a place in protective custody for the night, but Megan refused. "We can't trust anyone," Megan whispered, her eyes darting around the room like danger could leap from the walls. "They have people everywhere." Sarah didn't want to believe it. But after everything, the messages, the photos, the man at the warehouse, how could she not? So, they ran. Again. By midnight, Sarah and Megan were holed up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke, but it was better than being out in the open. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the burner phone they'd found in Megan's locked box, the one filled with threats and warnings. "We can't keep running," Sarah finally said, her voice low but firm. "They're not going to stop. We need to end this." Megan shook her head. "You don't know what you're saying, Sarah. These people, they're dangerous. They'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets buried. And if we don't do something, they'll keep coming after us. After me." Sarah met Megan's eyes, seeing the fear there, but also the exhaustion. Megan had been running for years. She couldn't run forever. After a long silence, Megan finally nodded. Okay. But we need proof. Something that ties them to the crime. Without that, we're just targets. The next morning, they had a plan. If Daniel Crane and his crew were so desperate to silence Megan, the proof had to be something big, something they couldn't risk getting out. And Megan knew exactly where to find it. There's a safe in his office at the docks, Megan whispered as they sat in the car, parked a few blocks away from the warehouse district. That's where he keeps everything. Cash, documents, blackmail. If we can get in there, we can end this, Sarah finished. It sounded insane. Breaking into the office of a known criminal wasn't exactly the safest idea. But it was the only one they had. As night fell, they made their move. The docks were eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant lapping of water against the piers and the occasional creak of metal. Megan led the way, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd been here before. Sarah followed close behind, her heart pounding in her ears. They reached Crane's office, a small building tucked away behind stacks of shipping containers. The door was locked, but Megan pulled out a set of old keys. From when I worked here, she'd explained, and within seconds, they were inside. The office was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through a cracked window. Papers were scattered across the desk, but Megan's focus was on the safe bolted to the floor in the corner. "Cover the door," she whispered, kneeling in front of it. "This will only take a minute." Sarah did as she was told, her eyes flicking nervously to the shadows outside. Every sound felt amplified, the groan of the metal floor beneath their feet, the distant bark of a dog, the soft click of Megan working the safe. Then, click. The safe swung open. Megan's eyes widened as she rifled through the contents. "This is it," she whispered, pulling out a stack of documents and a small flash drive. "This proves everything." But before they could celebrate, a voice echoed from the doorway. "Going somewhere?" Sarah spun around. Standing there, silhouetted in the doorway, was Daniel Crane. The scar on his face looked even more menacing in the moonlight, and the cold, smug expression in his eyes sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Behind him, two other men stepped into view, both armed. "I have to admit," Crane said, his voice smooth and mocking, "I didn't think you had it in you to come back here, Megan. But I guess I was wrong." Megan stepped in front of Sarah, clutching the documents to her chest. "It's over, Daniel. We have proof." "The police." "The police?" Crane laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "You think they'll help you? You think they're not already in my pocket?" Sarah's heart sank. They really couldn't trust anyone. Crane took a step closer, his gaze flicking to Sarah. "And you must be the roommate. The one pretending to be Megan. How's that working out for you?" Sarah's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "It's over. We have everything we need to expose you." Crane's smile faded. "No, you don't." He nodded to his men. "Get rid of them." Time slowed. Sarah's mind screamed at her to move, but her body felt frozen. Then, out of nowhere, Megan grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and hurled it at the nearest man. The distraction was enough. Sarah bolted for the door, Megan right behind her. Bullets ricocheted off the metal walls as they sprinted through the warehouse, the sound of Crane's furious shouting echoing behind them. They ducked behind a stack of crates, gasping for breath. Sarah clutched the flash drive in her hand like it was the most valuable thing in the world, because right now, it was. "We need to get to the car," Megan whispered, her face pale but determined. They made a run for it, dodging between shipping containers, their pursuers hot on their heels. Just as they reached the parking lot, headlights flooded the area. Police cars. For a split second, Sarah felt relief, until she remembered Crane's words. "You think they're not already in my pocket?" But the officers didn't hesitate. They surrounded Crane's men, guns drawn, shouting commands. One of the officers grabbed Sarah and Megan, pulling them to safety. "Are you okay?" he asked, but Sarah barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on Crane as he was shoved to the ground, his face twisted in rage. "This isn't over," he shouted as they cuffed him. "You hear me? This isn't over." But for the first time in days, Sarah felt like maybe, just maybe, it was. Back at the station, the flash drive revealed everything: evidence of Crane's criminal activities, connections to corrupt officials, even proof of the murder Megan had witnessed. It was enough to put him and his entire operation away for good. Sarah and Megan sat in silence as the officers processed the evidence. They'd survived. They'd fought back. But as they left the station that night, Sarah's phone buzzed. An unknown number. This isn't over. For a brief, fleeting moment, Sarah believed they were safe. Crane was behind bars, his operation dismantled, and the evidence Megan had risked her life to reveal was plastered all over the news. Headlines screamed local crime boss brought to justice and anonymous tip exposes corruption ties. But that message on Sarah's phone haunted her. This isn't over. Was it a bluff? One last scare tactic from Crane? Or was there something darker still lurking beneath the surface? A week passed. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a heavy, lingering paranoia. Sarah tried to settle back into her routine, classes, work, pretending like everything was normal. But it wasn't. Megan stayed with her, both of them too shaken to be alone. They barely slept, jumping at every creak of the apartment, every knock on the door. Sarah found herself checking over her shoulder constantly, scanning for the black car she feared would reappear at any moment. But nothing happened. No more messages. No strange cars. Just silence. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. One evening, Sarah and Megan sat in their tiny kitchen, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. They hadn't talked much about what happened, both of them pretending they'd moved on. But the weight of it hung in the air between them. "Do you think it's really over?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Megan stared into her coffee cup, silent for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I don't think people like Crane let things go." Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Neither do I," she thought. The next day, Sarah received a letter. No return address. Just her name scrawled across the front in the same messy handwriting as the envelope she'd found on her doorstep weeks before. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. No threats. No warnings. Just one sentence. "Some secrets never stay buried." Attached to the note was a photograph. It was Sarah, taken just 2 days ago, as she walked to class. The message was clear. They were still watching. Sarah showed the photo to Megan, her heart pounding in her chest. Megan's face went pale. "We need to leave," Megan whispered. "Now." But Sarah shook her head. "No more running." She grabbed her phone and called Detective Harris, the one officer they trusted, the only one who'd believed Megan's story from the start. He agreed to meet them at the station immediately. But when they arrived, something felt off. The station was quiet. Too quiet. Harris wasn't at his desk. In fact, the entire place felt like it had been abandoned in a hurry. "This doesn't feel right," Megan muttered. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. Another message. "Wrong move." Sarah's blood ran cold. Suddenly, the lights in the station flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through Sarah's chest as she grabbed Megan's hand, pulling her toward the exit. But before they could reach the door, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Detective Harris. But something was wrong. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "I told you," he said quietly, "you can't trust anyone." Megan gasped, realization dawning on her face. "You're with them." Harris smiled. "Crane might be in prison, but he's still in control. And he doesn't like loose ends." Sarah's mind raced. They'd trusted him. He'd been the one person they thought was on their side. But there were no sides anymore. Just survival. Harris pulled a gun, motioning for them to move toward the back of the station. "We're going to make this look like an accident," he said casually, like he was discussing the weather. Two nosy girls in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Sarah wasn't going down without a fight. As they passed a desk, Sarah spotted a heavy stapler within reach. In one swift motion, she grabbed it and hurled it at Harris, hitting him square in the face. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the station, but Sarah and Megan were already running. They ducked behind a filing cabinet, heartbeats thundering in their ears. "We need to get out of here," Megan whispered, her voice shaking. Sarah scanned the room, searching for an exit. Then she saw it, a side door, partially open, leading to the alley behind the station. "On three," Sarah whispered. 1, 2. Before she could say 3, Harris fired again. The bullet whizzed past Sarah's ear, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She and Megan bolted for the door, bursting into the cool night air. They didn't stop running. Not until they reached a nearby convenience store, breathless and terrified. Inside, the clerk stared at them, wide-eyed. Sarah grabbed the store's phone and dialed 911, her voice frantic as she explained what happened. This time, she didn't know who would show up. But it didn't matter. They had to try. Minutes later, sirens filled the air. But when the officers arrived at the station, Harris was gone. The next few days were a blur of police interviews, safe houses, and unanswered questions. The officers assured them they were protected, but Sarah knew better. Crane's influence ran deep. Harris was proof of that. But they weren't going to live in fear forever. Months later, Sarah and Megan moved to a new city, changed their names, started over. But some nights, Sarah would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she saw a black car parked outside. She knew the danger wasn't truly gone. Because some secrets never stay buried. What would you do if you knew the danger was still out there? Would you run, or fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.